8 coups since 2020. For those who can remember, it evokes the political volatility of the African continent in the 1950s. And soaring poverty rates, plummeting growth rates, and an increasing number of displaced people and asylum seekers are only spreading in the region. The humanitarian impact is visible. And so is the impact on economic development.
Many countries face deep-seated governance challenges, but military governments are not the solution. They aggravate problems, they cannot resolve a crisis, they can only make it worse.
What often follows coups are sanctions. The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, turned up the pressure on Niger by imposing sweeping sanctions last month. But does it work? It's the ordinary citizens that feels the sting of sanctions the most.
Frankly, I felt it in my pocket. And right now, where we are, we're all stocking up, I think. Most householders and the like, everybody is stocking up at home to take measures against these kinds of things. Are they just a few days away? An increase of $5 to $6. In a month's time, what's it going to be like? That's the question.
Analysts argue that deteriorating economic situations, not just authoritarianism, plays a key role in the proliferation of coups across Africa. A 2012 study by the African Development Bank says that good governance and policies that provide economic opportunities for all citizens may be the panacea to tackle political instability. And if economic factors increase the risk of military coups and political turbulence on the continent, the effects are felt around the world. Global inflation, especially in the prices of oil, minerals, and agricultural crops, is already rising. And the instability encourages geopolitical arm wrestling by world powers, scrambling for economic influence in Africa, instead of establishing strong, secure, and promising economies. Rahul Radhakrishnan, TRT World.
For more on this now, let's bring in Theo Ashampong. He is the Principal Consultant at S&P Global Market Intelligence, and he joins us now from Aberdeen in the UK. Thanks for being with us today. We've just heard in the report from our colleague, 8 coups in 2 years in 6 different countries in Africa. And I really want to ask at this point, are sanctions really working? Are they effective at all?
Thank you. Great to be here. The sanctions have not worked, and they are unlikely to work, often because they are ex post reactions to the coup. And it's really meant to force the coup leaders to the diplomatic table to try and negotiate. So specifically, if you look at the sanctions that have been imposed so far on many of the countries, these would include travel bans, asset freezes against the coup leaders, but also sometimes the financial institutions of the country being locked out of either regional or the international financial system. In the short term, generally they tend to work, but as you move along in the more medium to long term, they don't work, and they are not then deriving the intended outcomes, which is really to force the leaders to come to the table and negotiate.
Right. All of this is also having an economic impact on Africa. How are the coups really affecting the price of natural resources such as oil, but also gold and uranium? These countries are very rich in these resources.
Yeah, so the impact so far that we've seen has actually been fairly minor, and it's also been differentiated across the different natural resource value chain. So if we take, for example, oil and gas, Gabon is doing about 200,000 barrels of oil a day. Chad, that's about 140,000. But you've got a global demand in excess of 100 million barrels a day. So that's relatively a fraction of the global demand that these countries are meeting. And as we speak currently, oil price is well in excess of $86 a barrel. Same thing for gold. That with gold, if you look at, again, the coup countries in Africa, Mali, Sudan, Burkina Faso, they are major gold producers. However, they are not in the top 10. They are in the top 20. And again, the production from there is not enough to cause a major change in that price. What gets quite interesting is actually with uranium, where Niger is the seventh largest producer, and we've seen in the last couple of weeks since the coup took place in July, the price of uranium go up a little bit as the prospect of lower supply because of the coup begins to filter through to global markets. And then something similar with iron ore in Guinea as well.
Right. At the same time, it seems as if the anti-French sentiment is on the rise across Africa. Some analysts might say it was always there, it's always been present, but why especially now?
Absolutely. The anti-French sentiment we're seeing on the rise, and this is really part of the deep-rooted causes of the coup, where you've got major segments of the population that have become disenchanted, particularly because the democracies are not delivering the dividend to their people in terms of improving their welfare and well-being. But also in many of these countries, if you look at the population and how youthful they are, there's a certain sense of feeling that the French literally control to an extent, the economic power of many of these countries on account of that. So, for example, you can look at the CFA franc, the currency, which now is pegged to the euro, but hitherto was pegged to the French franc. And at the same time, you've got a requirement for many of these central banks in the Francophone countries to deposit as much as half of their reserves in or with the French treasury. And all of these sentiments, it largely driven or have driven the coups that we've seen, to the extent that we've seen French flags being burnt in the aftermath of the successive coups. And even in March of 2021 in Senegal, we saw some of the youthful protesters accusing President Macky Sall of quote unquote being a puppet of France. So you do see increasingly a lot of these sentiments and frustrations against France, but also at the root cause is the fact that in many of the countries, the fruits of the demographic and the democratic dividend is not being equally shared. And it comes across as though it's still the elite interest and self-preservation